Lie still now, my child.
Sometimes the universe tests you, right? Puts you in a situation where you got to choose between what's safe and what's right. Marcus Chen wasn't looking for that test. Homie was just trying to live quiet up in the Olympic Peninsula, mind his business, chop some wood, fix up his cabin, maybe catch some fish when the weather allowed it. But that's not how life works, especially in stories like this one, which, yeah, is made up, but stays with you anyway. Marcus was 42 years old and living alone in a cabin he'd built himself over 3 years, set deep in the rainforest, where the moss grew thick on everything, and the nearest town was a solid hour's drive on roads that barely deserved the name. He'd left Seattle after 12 years as a paramedic, burned out from the endless cycle of trauma and tragedy, needing somewhere his phone didn't ring every 5 minutes with another emergency. Out here, the only emergency was remembering to split enough firewood before the rain turned everything to mush. November in the Olympic Peninsula hit different. Not the sharp cold of the mountains, but this bone-deep damp that crept into everything: your clothes, your walls, your damn soul. The rain came sideways most days, driven by wind that made the ancient Douglas firs creak and sway like they were having conversations. Marcus had gotten used to it, even found something peaceful in the constant rhythm of water on his metal roof, living his best hermit life, learning which mushrooms were safe to eat and which berries the deer preferred, spending evenings reading by lantern light because the solar panels only did so much this time of year. Most people couldn't handle this much quiet. Marcus chose it on purpose. After a decade of sirens and screaming and trying to save people who were too far gone, he needed silence like other folks needed coffee. His daily routine was simple as hell. Wake up at dawn, make breakfast on the wood stove, spend mornings working on whatever project needed doing right now. It was reinforcing the shed before winter really hit. Then afternoons, fishing or foraging, or just sitting on his porch, watching the fog roll through the trees. Evenings were for reading, cooking, and listening to the forest settle into darkness. No internet out here. No streaming services. Amazon Prime. More like Amazon, maybe, if you drive to town and pick it up yourself. And honestly, he didn't miss any of it. His closest neighbors were a family of Roosevelt elk that grazed in the meadow quarter-mile east, and a pair of ravens that had figured out he sometimes left scraps near the compost. He'd see hikers maybe once a month on the trail that cut through the national forest nearby, but nobody came up to his cabin. That was by design. Marcus had built far enough off any official path that you'd have to really want to find him, and most folks didn't. But for about 2 weeks before it happened, something felt off. You know that vibe when someone's staring but you can't see him? Yeah, that. Marcus would be splitting wood and feel eyes on his back. He'd turn around, nothing but trees and fog. He'd be inside reading and hear something move past the cabin, too heavy to be a deer, too deliberate to be a bear just passing through. Branches would snap in the dark, always just beyond where his lantern light reached. Tracks appeared in the mud near his water source, huge prints, deeper than any boot print, with 5 distinct toe impressions that made his paramedic brain go human and his common sense go hell no. He didn't spook easy. 12 years running emergency calls meant he'd seen enough weird shit that some strange footprints weren't going to send him packing. But there was this feeling, this awareness, that he wasn't alone up here anymore. Something was watching, waiting, maybe trying to figure him out the same way he was trying to figure out what the hell was making those prints. The night it happened, Marcus was inside, working on dinner venison stew, using meat from a deer that had been hit on the highway and that he'd processed himself when he heard something that made him freeze mid-stir. A sound like nothing he'd heard before, even out here where the forest was full of strange noises. It was a vocalization, deep and resonant, somewhere between a howl and a moan, but with this quality that made every hair on his body stand up. Not aggressive though, that's what got him. It sounded desperate, almost pleading. Then came a second sound, higher pitched, weaker. And Marcus's paramedic instincts kicked in before his brain could tell him this was probably a terrible idea. That second sound was distress. Someone, or something, was in trouble. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and his medical bag. Yeah, he still kept one. Old habits, and stepped onto his covered porch. The rain was coming down steady, that November drizzle that soaked through everything, and the fog made his flashlight beam just bounce back at him. But he heard the sounds again, clearer now, coming from the tree line about 30 yards from his cabin. "Hello?" he called out, feeling stupid but needing to make some noise. Let whatever it was know he was coming. "Anyone hurt out there?" The deep vocalization came again, and this time Marcus caught movement in the fog. Something big shifted between the trees, then stepped just barely into the edge of his flashlight's reach. And this part right here, this is where Marcus's whole understanding of reality took a hard left turn. What stepped out of that fog was maybe 7 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown fur that hung in wet clumps from the rain. Broad shoulders, long arms, face that was simultaneously human and absolutely not flat features. Pronounced brow ridge, eyes that caught his flashlight and reflected it back, amber gold. A female, he realized, from the shape and the way she moved. And in her arms, cradled against her chest like a human mother would hold a child, was a smaller version of herself, maybe 4 feet tall, and clearly sick as hell. The big one, the mother, had to be made that deep sound again. And this time Marcus understood. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. Help. Every cell in his body screaming, hell no. But something else said help. Because he could see, even from 20 feet away in shitty light and heavy fog, that the young one wasn't right. Its head lolled against its mother's shoulder. Its breathing rapid and shallow. Its limbs hanging limp. Fever, probably. Infection, maybe. The mother's eyes met his, and he saw something in them that transcended species pure, terrified love for a dying child. Marcus had seen that look 1,000 times in emergency rooms. Parents who'd do anything, give anything, to save their kid. This was that, just in a form he'd never expected to encounter. "Okay," he said, voice steadier than he felt. "Okay, I see you. I see your baby. Let me help." And this is where Marcus had to make a choice that could have gone sideways real quick, because he had no idea what these things were capable of. For all he knew, this was some elaborate trap, and the mother was about to tear him apart the second he got close. But the paramedic in him, the part that had run toward danger 1,000 times to help strangers, wouldn't let him walk away from a sick kid, not even a Bigfoot kid. He set his medical bag down on the porch, held up both hands to show they were empty, and took a slow step forward. Then another. The mother watched him but didn't retreat. She made a softer sound, almost a whimper, and adjusted her hold on the young one. "I'm Marcus," he said, knowing it was probably pointless, but needing to fill the silence with something. "I used to help sick people, kids too. I can try to help yours, if you let me." Time slowed down. You feel me? Everything went quiet except the rain and his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The mother looked at him for what felt like an hour but was probably 10 seconds, then took 3 steps forward and carefully, deliberately, knelt down in the mud. She laid her child on the wet ground between them, and Marcus saw the trust in that gesture. She was making herself vulnerable, putting her most precious thing in his hands. He moved slow, real slow, like approaching a spooked horse, but way more intense, knelt across from her in the mud and rain, opened his bag, pulled out his flashlight. The young one's eyes were half closed, its breathing raspy, its fur matted with sweat and rain. He could see its chest working too hard, hear a wheeze in its lungs, respiratory infection, probably pneumonia, out here in this damp cold that could kill a human kid in days without treatment. He had no idea how these creatures' biology worked, but the symptoms looked familiar enough. "She's burning up," Marcus said softly, his hand hovering over the young one's forehead. He looked at the mother. "I need to touch her, check her vitals." "Okay." The mother made a low rumbling sound that somehow felt like agreement. Marcus placed his hand on the young one's forehead. Holy shit, the fever was intense. Had to be pushing 104, 105 degrees. Her pulse was rapid and thready when he found it on her neck, her breathing shallow and labored. Classic signs of severe infection. Okay, Mama, she needs warmth, fluids, and medicine. I've got antibiotics in my cabin, stuff I keep for emergencies. But I got to bring her inside where it's warm and dry. This rain's making everything worse. He gestured toward his cabin, then mimed carrying the child. The mother's eyes followed his movements, and for a moment Marcus thought she'd refuse, thought this was as far as trust could go. But then she reached down, gathered her child, and stood. She looked at the cabin, then back at him, and took a step toward it. Yeah, Marcus breathed. Yeah, okay, come on. Leading a 7-foot Bigfoot and her dying kid into his cabin was not how Marcus had planned to spend his Tuesday evening, but here they were. He held the door open, and the mother had to duck low to fit through, her massive frame barely clearing the doorway. She stood in his small main room, looking around at his books and his wood stove and his simple furniture, holding her child close. Marcus pointed to his bed in the corner. Put her there. It's warm, it's clean. The mother moved to the bed and laid her child down gently, then positioned herself right beside it, one massive hand on her baby's chest. Protective, not leaving her side. Marcus got it. If their positions were reversed, he wouldn't trust him either. All right, he said, mostly to himself, pulling out his medical supplies. Let's see what we can do. The next 72 hours tested every bit of Marcus's medical knowledge and his patience. He started with the basics, got the young one's temperature down using cool cloths, got fluids into her using a dropper when she wouldn't drink from a cup, administered broad-spectrum antibiotics that he hoped to God would work on whatever biology these creatures had. The mother never left her side, watching Marcus's every move with intense focus, occasionally making soft vocalizations to her child that sounded weirdly like a human parent soothing a sick baby. The first night was rough. The young one's fever spiked twice, and Marcus spent hours monitoring her vitals, adjusting her position to help her breathe easier, using his stethoscope to listen to her lungs, and hearing the congestion that confirmed his pneumonia suspicion. The mother watched him use every instrument with this expression that Marcus couldn't quite read: curiosity, mixed with worry, mixed with something like wonder that he was trying to help. Around 3 a.m., exhausted and running on coffee and adrenaline, Marcus looked at the mother and said, I need to sleep for a couple hours. Can you watch her? If her breathing gets worse, or if she gets cold, wake me up. Just make noise or shake me or something. The mother met his eyes and gave a single, deliberate nod. And in that moment, Marcus realized these creatures understood way more than anyone gave them credit for. This wasn't some primitive animal. This was a being with intelligence, with understanding, with all the same fears and hopes as any human parent. He crashed on his couch, and when he woke up 4 hours later, the mother was still in the exact same position, hand on her child's chest, monitoring every breath. She'd added wood to the stove at some point, keeping the cabin warm. She looked at him when he stirred, and Marcus saw the exhaustion in her eyes. She hadn't slept either. You need rest too, Mama, he said gently. You can't help her if you collapse. But she didn't move, just kept her vigil. Fair enough. Day 2 brought improvement. The young one's fever started to break, her breathing eased up, and she managed to drink some broth that Marcus made from the venison. The mother ate for the first time too. Marcus offered her bread and dried fruit, and she accepted it with what looked like gratitude. Small steps, but they were steps. By day 3, the young one was sitting up, her eyes alert, making soft chirping sounds to her mother. Marcus checked her lungs and found them mostly clear, her fever gone, her color better. She looked at him with these huge dark eyes full of curiosity, reaching out one small hand toward his stethoscope like a human toddler investigating something new. You're gonna be okay, little one, Marcus said, smiling despite himself. Tough as your mama. The mother made a sound then, deep and resonant, and Marcus felt it in his chest. She reached across the bed and placed her huge hand on his shoulder. The weight of it was immense, the strength behind it obvious, but the touch was gentle, grateful. She held his gaze for a long moment, and Marcus felt something pass between them, not words, but understanding. "You saved my child. Thank you. You're welcome," he whispered. That night, Marcus woke to find the mother standing at his window, looking out into the dark forest. The young one was asleep, breathing normally, definitely on the mend. But the mother was restless, shifting her weight, making low sounds into the darkness. Then Marcus heard it from somewhere deep in the forest, other vocalizations, calling back to her. Her family, her tribe, looking for her. She turned to him, and Marcus saw the conflict in her expression. She needed to return, needed to let her people know she was alive, but she was also still wary, still protective of her child. "They're looking for you," Marcus said. "Your family. They probably think you're dead or worse." He walked to the door, opened it. "You should call back. Let them know you're okay." The mother hesitated, then moved to the doorway. She stood there for a moment, then tilted her head back and let out a long, loud vocalization that echoed through the trees. Within seconds, multiple calls came back closer now, moving toward the cabin. The mother turned to look at Marcus, and he saw something new in her eyes. A question. Would he be safe when her tribe arrived? Was she putting him in danger by revealing his location? "It's cool," Marcus said, though his heart was definitely beating faster. "They need to know their people are safe. It's fine." Narrator voice. It was not necessarily fine, but Marcus was committed now. The mother made that grateful rumbling sound again, then returned to her child's side. They waited together in the warm cabin, listening to the approach of something big moving through the forest. Multiple somethings. Getting closer. Just before dawn, Marcus looked out his window and felt his breath catch. They were coming. Not just one or two, but many, emerging from the fog and rain like ghosts becoming solid. Massive figures moving through the trees with impossible silence for their size, converging on his cabin from multiple directions. He stepped outside onto his porch, and what he saw made everything else in his life suddenly feel small and irrelevant. There had to be 20 of them, maybe 25, scattered through the tree line surrounding his property. Different sizes, different colorations of fur, brown, black, reddish-brown, silver-gray. Young adults, full adults, a few massive ones that had to be the elders. All of them standing completely still, watching his cabin with focus so intense. Marcus could feel it like physical pressure. This was the moment everything changed. Because Marcus understood, looking at them, that he was seeing something most humans never would. An entire community, a whole hidden society, and they were allowing him to witness them, or they were deciding whether to kill him for taking their people. Hard to say which. The door opened behind him, and the mother stepped out with her child in her arms. The young one was awake now, looking around with bright eyes, clearly feeling better. The second they appeared, the reaction from the assembled Bigfoots was immediate. Vocalizations filled the air, not threatening, but emotional. Relief, joy, family reuniting. One of them stepped forward from the group, an enormous male, with silver streaking through his dark fur, bearing himself with obvious authority. The elder, the leader, had to be. He approached the mother and child with purpose, and the mother made a long, complex series of sounds, gesturing toward Marcus, toward the cabin, telling the story he realized, explaining what happened. The elder listened, then turned his full attention to Marcus. Those eyes, ancient and intelligent and searching, locked onto him, and Marcus felt like he was being evaluated on every level. The elder studied him for what felt like forever, then looked back at the mother and child, at the young one's obvious health and energy compared to days ago. Then the elder did something that made Marcus's throat tight. He turned back to Marcus, placed one massive hand over his own chest, then extended it toward Marcus in what could only be a gesture of respect. The big mama wasn't playing around the elder, was acknowledging what Marcus had done, claiming it in front of the whole tribe. Marcus had saved one of their own, and that mattered. Other Bigfoots began emerging from the tree line, approaching in small groups. Not threatening, just present. Bearing witness. 2 smaller adults, probably the young one's father and aunt. Marcus guessed from how they immediately went to the mother and child, touching them, checking them, making soft, concerned sounds. The young one chirped happily at them, wriggling in her mother's arms, clearly wanting down. The mother set her carefully on the ground, and the kid immediately toddled over to Marcus on wobbly legs, grabbing his pants leg with surprising strength. She looked up at him and made a sound that was probably their version of thank you, or maybe just I like you, and Marcus felt something break open in his chest. He'd saved a lot of lives in his years as a paramedic, but this felt different. This felt like it mattered on a level he couldn't quite explain. The mother scooped her child back up, gave Marcus one last long look, so much communicated in that gaze, more than words could ever say, and rejoined her family group. The elder raised one hand, and every single Bigfoot in that clearing responded instantly, forming up into some kind of organized group. But before they left, 3 of them approached the porch, each carrying something. The first laid down a smooth stone, carved with markings Marcus couldn't read, but that clearly meant something. The second placed a bundle of plants, medicinal herbs. He realized after a moment, ones he recognized, and ones he didn't. The third set down what looked like a carved piece of cedar, shaped into something between a bowl and a piece of art. Gifts, offerings, payment for services rendered, or maybe just acknowledgement that debts had been honored. The elder made one more sound, deep and resonant, and the entire tribe turned as one and began moving back into the forest. The mother looked back once, her child waving one small hand at Marcus, and then they disappeared into the fog and trees like they'd never been there. Within 30 seconds, the clearing was empty again. Only the gifts on Marcus's porch and the absolutely massive footprints in the mud proved any of it had happened. Marcus stood there for a long time, rain falling on his head, staring at the spot where they'd vanished. His cabin felt suddenly very empty. The forest felt different now, not because something dangerous lurked in it, but because he knew he shared it with others. Others who could have killed him 100 times over, but chose to trust him instead. Others who loved their children and cared for their sick and honored their debts just like any human would. He went back inside, made coffee, and sat by his wood stove trying to process what the hell just happened. The carved stone sat on his table, catching the morning light. The medicinal herbs hung from his rafters, drying. The cedar bowl held a place of honor on his mantle, physical evidence that he hadn't dreamed the whole thing. Over the next weeks and months, Marcus noticed changes. Game was more plentiful near his cabin, like something was directing deer and elk his way. His water source, which had been getting clogged with debris, stayed mysteriously clear. Once, he found a massive pile of firewood stacked near his shed, perfectly cut lengths of dry cedar and alder, way more than he could have processed in a week, just appeared overnight. No note, no explanation needed. He never saw them again, not directly, but he knew they were there, watching over their territory, and that he was allowed to be part of it. Every so often, he'd hear their calls in the distance, echoing through the valleys, and he'd feel something settle in his chest. He wasn't alone out here. None of them were. So what's the lesson here, right? Marcus had spent years in Seattle trying to save lives and burning out from the weight of it, feeling like nothing he did mattered in the face of endless trauma. But out here, in the middle of damn nowhere, he'd saved one life and been trusted by an entire hidden community because of it. Sometimes it's not about saving everyone. Sometimes it's about showing up for that one moment when someone or something needs help and choosing compassion over fear. This whole thing's fiction, but ask yourself if something knocked on your door asking for help, something that society says doesn't exist, something that scared the hell out of you, would you open that door? Would you take that risk? Would you choose helping over hiding? Marcus did. And it changed everything. Drop your thoughts below. Peace.